analyzing the landscape characteristics of the Texas antelope squirrel. So they are mainly found in Mexico, Texas, and New Mexico, but for the sake of today's project, we're only be looking at New Mexico and Texas. They usually live in burrows at the sides of bushes or large rocks, but the crevices among these rocks may serve as den sites. Usually, they live around the edges of the lower valleys and in the low hills, typically in dry areas. A. interpretus are one of the few mammals that must remain active in the West Texas summers. So for my presentation, I extracted the data from INAT from the dates 1991 to 2025. I've got 271 observations. These are research grade observations. You can see on this map that they are primarily centered around West Texas and even up into New Mexico and up towards Albuquerque. So for my methods of land cover quantification, I only did the cropland data layers from New Mexico and Texas, and after filtering the 271 occurrence points, I put a buffer of 500 meters in, and I then dissolved all the overlapping buffers to get 144 independent buffers. And then upon those 144 buffers, I then selected 5 at random. The buffers I selected at 5 at random were buffers 36, 43, 78, 95, and 105. For the landscape metrics, I chose 7 metrics that were used to calculate the landscape metrics. I used an 8-cell rule because A. interpretus is mobile but terrestrial and only found in certain land cover types, as the species tend to live in burrows and dens. They typically will live in like shrubland, anywhere where there's like rocks or bushes, somewhere they can really hide. For the 3 C's, the first one, composition, I chose patch richness, Shannon diversity index, Shannon evenness index, and patch area. Those really do a great job at composition, but the main one I'm going to focus on today is percentage of land. And that is going to be a class metric, not on a class level, not a landscape level. So for configuration, I did aggregation or ag, and then connectivity, I did contagion. Those are going to be really good at showing maybe how everything is laid out, as well as how everything bounces back on each other. It just gives you a really good idea of how the animal will move around its surroundings. For my methods of landscape metrics, the class level metrics for each land cover are shown below. I have separated out by buffers. So if you look to the left, they are labeled buffers. Then on the right, you will have the ag, the P area, and the P land. That first section is going to be only class level metrics. And then on the right, that's going to be the landscape level metrics. I do want to point out on the buffers, I went ahead and put them on here. The buffer with the yellowish orange circle, that's going to be buffer 36. This is going to be very important because it does have that large open water land cover type. So I want to draw attention to that before I move on. So for my results of land cover, overall, Texas and New Mexico, it has 82 land cover types present. 51% of that is shrubland, 9.11% of that is evergreen forest, 18% of that is grassland and pasture, 1.86 is deciduous forest, and 19.97 is other land cover types. Each of them are below the 2% threshold, so I did not include them in my pie chart or calculations. So if we look at the pie chart for just overall Texas, New Mexico, we will see that the shrubland is a little bit over 51%. This is important because that's where you will typically find the Texas antelope squirrels. That's their ideal, habitat and land cover type. You will also find them in the grassland pasture, which is only 18% of Texas and New Mexico. However, for my 5 buffers, only 9 of the land cover types were present out of the 82. We found that 78.52% of the buffers were mostly shrubland. This is, once again, a very large number considering that only half of Texas and New Mexico are shrubland. And we found that 0.738 is evergreen forest, 9.78 is grassland pasture, 0 deciduous forest, and 6.14 developed. This is also very important based upon the calculations we will do next. So for my results, I want to pay attention to the very top, buffer 36 open water. This has a percentage of area of 22.7%. Now, typically what I found with my buffers, that the buffer and the patch area will go hand in hand. As one increases, the other one will increase as well. And the one that I want to also draw attention to is shrubland. Shrubland for each of the buffers is well over 50%, with the highest being in buffer 43 with 98.9%, and the lowest being in buffer 95 at 51.8%. This once again just shows you that they are favoring the shrubland and maybe not so much things like winter wheat or developed. So for composition, the two states as a whole had 82 land cover types. However, in the 5 buffers selected, they only had contained 9 of those land cover types. Therefore, they lacked a fair representation of all the land cover types in Texas. Shrubland was the land cover type that was most well represented, as the 2 states were 51.6% shrubland, and the buffers, the shrubland, was 78.52%. This is due to A. interpretus observation sites and habitat selections and preferences. Configuration: A. interpretus occurrences were most associated with high irrigation, meaning that patches of shrubland are most dominant and tightly enclosed, thereby aggregated, whereas patches such as winter wheat or the developed may have a more patchy dispersal. Connectivity: A. interpretus were relatively connected, as the highest buffer connectivity was 43 with 98.8% contiguous, and the lowest was buffer 95 with 58.3%. They were mainly found in shrubland and developed areas. This can be due to their ideal habitat, as they like to live in burrows and dens, but it can also be due to areas such as like the developed being seen in occurrences, because they are maybe being lured out with food enticement, or such as like bird feeders or such like that. Conclusions: almost spermphilous interpretus were mainly observed in areas of shrubland and grassland pastures, which will be their typical preferred land cover types. However, they were also observed in developed areas, which is not expected occurrences and were associated mainly with. Through the 5 buffers of shrubland and grassland was well represented in data, but with the buffers having developed being overrepresented, some data points were not able to accurately demonstrate the percent land cover types that the species would typically and naturally be found in. As the 5 buffer points were selected at random, the analysis contained land cover types such as open water and development in the calculation that will cause data impurities, as these sightings may be due to roads, parks, and even baiting the squirrels using feeders. And that is my presentation.